Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and today we're going to be making a tier list slash raid comp of sorts for the upcoming raid in 11.1, Liberation of Undermine, trying to fill in what will likely, maybe possibly be like the best or one of the best comps of a raid heading into, well, March 4th. And also, super quick before the video starts here, just to clarify, guys, I've made a handful of videos in the past couple days that aren't really based on Warlock stuff. I'm not leaving Warlock behind. I'm going to make a video on this later on as well, but we're expanding the reach of the channel in 11.1, just in general, beyond to PvE-based stuff, general content, and all that. So if you're new to the channel and want to see more of that, feel free to sub. It would be a huge... it'd be awesome. I'm pushing for 100k subs this year if we can get it. If not, it's okay. I love you guys all the same, but maybe consider it. Regardless, my heart still is full for you. Now let's get it going. All right, now getting into building the actual raid comp here, I want to say off the bat that unlike Mythic Plus testing, where we did like the raid tier or the tier list and everything else here, raid testing concluded about 2.5-3 weeks ago, and the bulk of the raid was tested in a 2-week period, very early to PTR dropping, where most classes, it seemed like a lot of them are either bugged, undertuned, without working tier was broken, in a non-fully functional form. Now the bosses were seen, which is cool, but a lot of classes didn't really get to like display their actual damage profile and tuning, which makes making this list and comp a decent bit more difficult compared to M+, which you can, tweak and tune classes if we can then go run the dungeon and, hey, see where they're at, right? Now, as far as tanks are concerned, I did ask Dr. Atnos himself what he's looking at, like maybe tank-wise this tier, and he sent me this image, which obviously helps clarify. Thank you, Dr. Atnos, for that. But memes aside, this may change, and if it does, with class tuning coming maybe this week, maybe tomorrow, today, depending on announcements, or before the raid opens, I will maybe try and remake this depending on how much tuning comes. Now, as far as tanks are concerned, it's not really my area of expertise, but each tank does have its own niche bit of utility. I mean, obviously, like Prop Paladin, pretty solid in damage, what I've heard right now. At the same time, Blessings, Spell Warding, Bop, being able to immune things in general, negate mechanics, pretty strong. Blood Decay, Gorfian's Grasp, AMZ being brought to the raid, Brewmaster, Transcendence, obviously Stagger, Damage Negation, all that. Mystic Touch being very strong, depending on your comp, if you have a Mistweaver or a Windwalker. If not, Brewmaster covers that raid buff, and solid Stagger Negation. Guardian and Prot are in odd spots. I mean, yeah, they do bring certain things here and there, their own, like, semi-niche utility and such, but unless they're, like, doing a lot of damage, or negating like abilities in a unique manner where other tanks can't, I feel like you really don't see them as often. I've heard prots doing a lot of damage now, but I haven't really seen it or, played with any raid testing because it's been a while. When it comes to Vengeance, similar to Brewmaster, I mean, they're doing solid damage, what I've heard, have their own decent bit of like semi-niche utility, but also have Chaos Brand. So there's that. Now, I do think, spoilers ahead, you're probably going to have a Havoc Demon Hunter in your raid comp this tier, at least one. But regardless, I feel like as far as tanks are concerned, a lot of it just depends on what your group needs. Some fights you might need Mass Grip, like Ovanax. Some fights, like Kybeza, you don't need it at all, right? Prop Paladin, if you want to negate certain mechanics, can be good. Otherwise, depending on tuning, might not be the best. As far as like Brewmaster and Vengeance are concerned, obviously having raid buffs is important. I think Windwalker is fine this tier. Their single target seems semi-solid and stuff. It seems solid. Both them and Mistweaver are likely in contention somewhere for a raid spot, but I feel like Brewmaster, I'm going to throw it up here for like the most, I guess, universally applicable tank, or one of the two here. Stagger Negation, just Mystic Touch, obviously, and just general semi-niche utility, whatever, in certain spots. I feel like if you look at raid comps in the past, it's I've been like within reason. You can make an argument for the most like semi-tried and true tank out there without like needing niche utility. Once again, like, like Paladin with like bops or certain things here and there, or Blood Decay Mass Grips, so on and so forth, right? Outside of that, you got Blood Decay, Prop Paladin, and Vengeance Demon Hunter. Once again, if you want to cover a raid buff, Vengeance is fine. If not, you've got Prot and Blood, Prot Warrior, and Guardian Druid. I mean, also Guardian does indeed bring Mark of the Wild, which is solid. Warrior, Shout, and all that. But I feel like overall you're going to have a mix of DPS Warriors and DPS Druids in your raid tier, looking at like Boomkin, Arms Fury Warrior. So I'm going to sort of like put these aside as far as raid buffs are concerned, and look more towards Blood, Prot, and Vengeance. Now, when it comes to Prot versus Vengeance, I'm not really sure what's doing better overall damage-wise, but like Prot's overall reach and utility when it comes to blessings, immunities, just its general damage profile, a bit of healing here and there, I think does put it a little bit ahead of Vengeance here, but I'm not saying it's going to be the end-all be-all. There could literally be a fight where you double Blood Decay, like Brood Twister, if you want those damage profiles, you want those grips, right? There might be a fight you want to Vengeance DH. If you need a raid buff, you can just play Brewmaster and Vengeance. It feels like the tanks are pretty interchangeable this tier, which is the case every tier, but even more so this tier, depending on tuning and things. Now, depending on what happens with, this week and heading into the raid, they could buff and nerf things, so that could change this up. I'm just going to say, honestly, tried and true Brewmaster Prop Paladin, and go from there. If that changes, don't hate me. Tanks are not my area of expertise, but, Dr. Atnos, stamp of approval. Now, as far as healing is concerned, it is not my forte. I am not a healer. I mainly play DPS and things, but I do think I have a pretty decent idea of to where the healing comp for this raid very well will likely possibly land a bit. I've watched Jack's tier list as well, and he, has relatively similar feelings. I would err towards him if you're looking for more of an in-depth healer kind of breakdown, but I think one thing is pretty agreeable across the board, and that is that Discipline Priest is very strong right now, both at M+ and rating. Obviously, they bring stamina buff, they bring power infusion, massive spell, so on and so forth, and the healing profile they bring looks to be exceptionally strong heading into Liberation of Undermine. I think for the most part, they're going to be like the first slot in here for that healer comp. I'm going to list 4 healers here. Maybe you want to 3 heal certain fights. Maybe you want to 5 heal. Maybe there's an anomaly this raid. But we're going to throw Disc here in number 1 with the potential to even maybe play 2 Disc Priests depending on how things go. As far as like that next overall couple healers here, Holy Priest I think is a pretty easy slot in here as well. Obviously Power Infusion, their ability to put out raw healing, similar to what Mistweaver can do as well. Also pumping out that raw healing, those raw numbers, is not to be undervalued. Now, playing Monk obviously does bring you Mystic Touch. If you're not playing a Brewmaster, maybe you're playing a Blood Decay for Mass Grips or just something else besides Brewmaster, you're not opting to play a Windwalker Monk. Mistweaver can also bring that Mystic Touch debuff for the raid, which is very, very important. Mistweaver's in an odd spot. Well, I guess has been in an odd spot. It feels like for the past 5 tiers, whatever it's been, where they look really strong on alpha or beta or PTR, massive healing output potential, and the raid comes around, they end up getting nerfed or end up not really being part of that optimal healing comp. So maybe this is their tier, their time to shine. I did see a little bit of a debate talking about maybe even playing double Mistweaver, like Disc Holy double Mistweaver, but it feels like I think I even leave this I actually am re-recording this healer section here. I think I leave double Mistweaver with Disc Holy in the DPS part of the video, but one thing to hit on here as well is that preservation is still a thing. Evoker, you're very likely playing augmentation this raid tier, aug or dev somewhere regardless. You're going to have a lizard in the raid for their debuffs or their movement buff, the raid buff, whatever it's called. I forgot what it is. And the utility they bring, obviously not to be undervalued. One thing though is that Boomkin does look solid this tier on a handful of fights. Feral looks good too, but I mean, I think Boomkin's damage profile compared to Feral when you're looking at what this raid demands is likely a decent bit better. Now, there might be some fights where you don't want a Boomkin. You're probably not playing a Guardian Druid, I'd venture to guess, so that Resto Druid slot, bringing Mark the Wild, bringing that versatility, and some of their niche utility they bring, I mean, Innervate and other random things here and there they can do. I would venture to guess there's definitely a Disc Priest, a double disc or holy, very likely a Mistweaver in this 4th spot. I mean, probably towards Restorer Druid. It could be a second Holy Priest, second Disc Priest, maybe double Mistweaver, possibly. Prez is fine, but from what I've heard, I haven't seen many during PTR. Their healing output is not what it was in Nerebar Palace, which is unsurprising. They're very strong. A lot of stack healing in their profile as well, which is fine, but it seems like from what I've heard and things about a Disc Priest just sort of does that a little better. And I mean, let's be honest, they're the best healer currently. PI, the healing profile, HPS, and even DPS in a sense too, right? And then the last 2 we have here are Restoration Shaman and Holy Paladin. I mean, once again, Paladin's utility, not to be underestimated. Diva Aura, this and that, Blessing, so on and so forth. But at the same time, from what I've heard from H-Pallies, is that they're just sort of undertuned. Maybe a candidate for an aura buff. To a similar extent, Shaman could also be that thing. They do indeed bring Sky Fury, but you're going to play Ellie and or Enhance this tier. Spoilers ahead. Due to their lack of healing, everything else, and the strength of Disc, Holy being strong, Mystery being good for just that on demand, that strong healing throughput, and Resto having that HPS, a strong healing profile and everything, I feel like this healing comp meshes pretty well. This 4 slot, once again, I could see a world, maybe you want double Mistweaver, maybe you want double Disc, something along those lines, but I think generally this is probably a pretty good place to start for healing. Healing is not my forte or my area of expertise, but I think this matches pretty well from what we've seen in raid testing and, heard in more recent updates. All right, now when it comes to building a DPS comp for Narrow Palace, this is where things get really interesting, because you have to keep in mind raid buffs, but you also need to keep in mind just tuning of current classes. Things might change, and all of that. Now, this is also a very interesting raid tier where it looks like sims are being done for all the classes right now. I don't think many are out yet. Some are, some aren't. Lock is not ready yet. It looks like a lot of melee are higher than most range, give or take, but a lot of this raid is like a spread cleave. They're spread cleave encounters. You can get some stat cleave, but this is the first raid we've seen in a long time where there's not a lot of like just stat cleave fights. Now, we don't know about last boss Gallywix yet at this point, which could be a meat grinder based fight. It sort of seems like it might be, but Mythic is blank basically in the dungeon journal. We're not sure. So we're going to try and build our comp based around that damage profile wise. It's important to keep in mind though that Warrior might be simming at 3.1 million. But at the same time, if they can just be a patchwork meat grinder versus like the most raid being spread cleave like Destro or Shadow or AF or other, range cleave based specs, they might be simming really high, but the profile might not be as valuable. But then again, if you're doing a lot in single target, you can just pipe a boss. Well, sure. So a lot of balancing may be needed this coming tier. Speaking of balance, starting off here with the first DPS here, Balanced Druid's been in an interesting spot because they bring Mark of the Wild. You're probably not going to play a rest of a Druid, probably not playing a Guardian Druid. When it comes to like Feral versus Balance, I mean, Feral's damage is solid. Their single target is good. Their stat cleave is good. But once again, it feels like there's a lot of classes that bring just solid single target this tier that bring their own utility as well. And when you're comparing Feral to Balance, a lot of spread cleave this tier. Balance, if things live for a while, we've seen it on, we saw it on Styx, we saw it on One Arm Bandit, Styx, Rick Reverb, when you had those ads spawning with spread cleave. Some spawn near the boss, some spawn in the back of the room. Druid, for the most part, can cleave all those down pretty easily, bringing a lot of sustained cleave damage. Their CDs can be pooled or I guess, save for certain spots of relevant progression where it's needed. I think you're definitely playing a Druid this raid tier. Now, is it at a point where you're going to play two balanced Druids? Possibly, probably not. They are relatively squishy still, which is, one of their downsides here, but a lot of utility. Once again, Mark the Wild, Verse Buff, Innervate, so on and so forth. So it depends. Balance definitely has a spot in this raid tier. I'd throw at least one in here for now. We'll build the rest of the comp and see where it goes. Now, as for, also to clarify, this bench stuff, not really any bench. I just wanted more spots for all the specs here. But don't worry, Lock will be on the bench. Jokes aside, number 2, we have Havoc here. Now, Havoc Demon Hunter was pretty bad for most of raid testing. They ended up, they were at the bottom of the meters. Didn't really have a whole lot of relevance, a whole lot of value, but they've received a decent bit of buffs. I think there was a handful of buffs coming in like multiple weeks from what I remember. Havoc looks strong right now. They're good in single target, they're good in cleave, stat cleave more or less, and at the same time, once again, they bring Chaos Brand. Now, if you're playing a Vengeance Demon Hunter, Chaos Brand, not really a concern of yours, but if you're not, which you very well might not be this tier, depending on what you need and what your raid comp looks like, Havoc is a very strong option. Outside of like Chaos Brand, not a whole lot of like insane utility, but Brand obviously something in itself. Their damage profile seems strong. And for the most part, having that one slot, bringing Chaos Brand, if you're not playing Vengeance, I think Havoc is pretty easy to slot into your raid this tier. One of the classes that you may see two of, depending on certain fights, but once again, like that stat cleave profile this tier, not like exceptionally valuable. Not as valuable as previous tiers, unless fights like Muggsy end up being stacked at certain points, which for the most part don't look to be, or more so, sorry, Gallywix. We're not really sure based on the journal being blank and mythic, but, worth keeping in mind. Havoc is looking pretty solid from what I've heard, good in single target, and also, being strong with their stat cleave. Once again, as far as Feral's concerned here, you can bring a Feral. I'm going to bump these up and down here. You can bring a Feral Druid. It's probably fine, but the versatility buff can be covered by a Balanced Druid, which profile just seems better this tier. Not as squishy as a Balanced Druid, but once again, for the most part, Balance's profile just seems better. I do think Feral's good in single target from what I've seen. Once again, the stat cleave looks good, but Demonology is in a similar spot where it brings a good stat cleave profile and like solid-esque single target, but you're not really seeing that on a whole lot of fights this tier. A lot of it is spread cleave, prio ads that don't spawn on the boss. They're around the boss, but they're outside that cleave range. So Feral could be brought, but as far as like raid buffs in 2025, yes, 2025, your raid comp's pretty tight, and quite often Feral, if balance is better or you're playing a Guardian or Rest Druid, sorry, it is what it is. Moving on to Warlock stuff here, just, we'll save one Warlock spec for later on. Affliction, to the bench. You're not playing Affliction in this raid tier. Jokes aside, as far as lock stuff is concerned, It is a spread cleave raid this tier. Hellcaller being our hero talent is exceptionally strong. Hellcaller is a hero talent, but it is the best spec for Warlock this tier. It is very, very good. It looks currently be a Destro Warlock raid tier. AF does also have Hellcaller, both AF and Destro, but Affliction is just not really in a great spot. There could be a fight or two where you play an AF lock, maybe over Destro, depending on what the fight actually takes. If you can get some stat cleave on certain fights, like 6 Bunk Junker, maybe at times on Rick Reverb. You could even see Demonology swap in here for like maybe Gallywix if there's stat cleave here and there. All the lock specs seem to be relatively interchangeable if you need. None of them are incredibly flashy, but they, like, Destro brings a very good damage profile this tier. Now, Destro's simming at about 2.3 million versus Warrior being 3.1, from what I understand. But once again, that stat cleave profile of Warrior being 3.1 million, or whatever it is, compared to a spread cleave profile of hitting 2 targets with Havoc at the same time for Destro Lock or AF Lock or other dot-based classes, that comes into play in consideration and all that as well. Obviously, Warlock, you're going to have one in the raid for the most part. Gateways, Health Stones, Soul Stones, all that kind of stuff. Very important. So one lock would be somewhere leaning mostly towards Destro this tier. You could see AF or Demo swap in here on a fight or two, but it looks to be mostly a Destro tier, which, unlike a lot of previous tiers where you've seen a lot of Demonology and stuff, yeah, I mean, appears to sort of be the case. Now, moving on from there, as far as Lizard is concerned here, augmentation versus Dev, it's going to come down to just how Dev is tuned. It's received a handful of buffs. This week it received a 4% buff. I mean, looking at Nerva Palace, right? I mean, coming out of Amirasil and all that, which was like the first on display tier for augmentation, obviously very strong. But in Nerva Palace, we ended up seeing Devastation play for the most part on, I believe, basically every fight except for Brood Twister, when you wanted to further amplify that Frost Decay damage profile for those spider ads and the ads that were way overtuned at that point in time, right? And that's the thing with augmentation. Obviously, they're going to bring Time Spiral, they're going to bring their movement buff, whatever it's called, the gold buff, you know what it is, I forgot. Insane utility, obviously Roar, Cauterizing Flame, so on and so forth, Renewing Blaze, but at the same time, like, having the ability to amplify a damage profile that's already very good, whether it's like Frost Decay, or if you want more single target on a boss, amplifying the highest simming single target spec, maybe Arms, Fury, whatever it is, or amplifying those classes that had that spread cleave profile that are cleaving an ad over here, another ad 20 yards away, that things like Warrior, or Havoc Demon Hunter, or Ret Paladin can't cleave, is very, very strong if you need to meet those DPS checks on those fights. Once again, Dev's been buffed a handful of times this tier over the course of PTR. It does sort of seem like Dev's stat cleave profile probably isn't as strong, and you're likely looking at least one augmentation evoker. I would give a nod towards Aug this tier over Dev. I could be wrong there. Once again, buffs could change everything, but it does indeed feel like this is going to be more of an Aug tier. A lot of like specific damage profiles are required in Liberation of Undermine, and I mean, once again, having Aug and their slew of utility, as you can see here in this, you know, ever going list of externals and personals and crowd control, is strong. We're going to put one here. It very well could probably end up just being 2 Augs. I'll even put 2 here for now, and depending where this list ends, I haven't planned ahead. We might trim one, but I mean, with how this raid's damage profile looks to be, I think 2 Aug is probably, you know, up there. Moving on here and just finishing up the rest of the range DPS, I guess, give or take. Hunter stuff, I mean, you've got Marks and Beast Mastery. Marks was good in testing early on, but it was bugged from what I've heard. BM has been solid in M+. Now, BM's single target does seem to be pretty decent. It is, I would consider BM a range spec, you know, even though you can, a bit of a meat grinder there with like melee and things at times, or I guess consistent AoE at times. There's, once again, not a whole lot of stat cleave this tier. You can get it at times. The cool thing with BM is a lot of it's just sort of like, it seems like it's sort of passive and consistent and built into like the default damage profile they have. Their single targets seem solid. They do bring Hunter's Mark, obviously, which this tier, there is one patchwork fight. It is Sprocketmonger, Lock, and Stock. Besides that, there are still fights where it's relevant. I mean, you want to put, like, obviously putting it on, you know, Vexy on the first boss, which there are ads present, but keeping Mark on the main boss is relevant for the damage amp. It's relevant, but it's not Mark of the Wild. It's not Chaos Brand. It's not Mystic Touch. But I mean, due to how BM is tuned and their current damage profile and all that, you'll likely have one in the raid. Depending on the fight, it could be a clash you see 2 of stacked, depending on what that fight might want. But I think at this point you say, hey, we're playing one BM Hunter. Survival and Marks, I mean, from what I've heard, Marks' overhaul has just been pretty subpar. I'm going to put Fury back up here. Mark's overhauls have been pretty subpar. I haven't seen it. Obviously, raid testing concluded before a lot of the changes came in. Survival to a similar extent. I mean, it's fine, probably. They're all bringing Mark. But in the end, BM looks to be very strong this tier. I mean, they're S tier basically and M plus right now for their profile. Very consistent damage, short CDs, and that will translate relatively well over to Liberation of Undermine. At least I feel. Now, as far as, once again, finishing off the range here, moving that over there, Arcane, Fire, and Frost, I'm going to be honest, like, Fire and Frost are doing very well in M+. I think Arcane is, like, sort of mid as far as rating is concerned as well. They're mages, man. They're going to be in the raid. They bring everybody utility possible. You want a cheat death, you got it. You want an immunity, you got it. You want a lust, you got it. You want 2 immunities, sure, why not? You want a mass barrier, you got it. You want to go invisible for some reason, why not? Sure, hey, do it to it. You want curses spells, let's go. There's going to be at least one mage in this raid. I think it's quite possible you play 2 mages. Fire and Frost are interchangeable, I guess, for the most part. I'm not really sure what's actually doing better for mage at this current point in time, but there are some varying damage profiles there. From what I heard, Arcane is just sort of on the outside looking in. I believe it received buffs this last week, I'm pretty sure, but I'm not totally sure where it's sitting at this current point in time, with there being likely another tuning patch looming, but still being, you know, a little bit of a odd outlier looking in. Now, rounding everything else out here as far as range is concerned, you've got Elemental and you've got Shadow Priest, right? So this makes things interesting because obviously Shaman is bringing Sky Fury. Enhance is good. Ellie is good. Enhance was nerfed this last week. It's still pretty solid as far as M+ is concerned. From what I've heard, it's still very consistent. They did also nerf, I think, Storm Strike a few days ago, and I think it was Storm Strike, and I haven't heard a whole lot since then. Now, on a positive note, if Enhance is not as strong as it was before, but Ellie's still pretty good. You want that Sky Fury in raid. You're going to be playing one Ellie and one Enhance. Ellie does have the option to cleave, I guess, on a bit of a wider scale, like arguably a little bit more. I think you're likely still slotting in an Enhance here, but Ellie is still very, very strong. I wouldn't even be surprised if you see one Ellie and one Enhance this raid here. Maybe it's like my go out on a limb kind of thing. Say, hey, maybe, yeah, you know, but at the same time, you got to keep raid comp in mind here. At this point, if you play one of each, you literally have, 4 raid slots left. We haven't even done melee this point. So welcome to 2025 and raid comps being super tight again. The last, I guess, range spot here before we get into the rest of the melee, even though I threw a couple in here already due to how OP they are, is going to be Shadow Priest. Now, Shadow Priest is in a weird spot. It is, once again, a spread cleave profile kind of raid tier, right? There is some, patchwork relevancy, some funnel relevancy and all that, like every tier, right? But from what I've heard, Shadow's simming around 2.6 million. That could be wrong. I don't know. I've heard their tier set is a lot of their damage, like 26%. And tier sets don't go live like that. Now, are they going to receive compensation buffs? I'd say really more so when they get nerfed, their tier bonus versus if they get nerfed. It's hard to say. Now, obviously, a Shadow Priest does indeed bring Fort. You're playing Disc and Holy, this raid tier, so nothing to be concerned about there. They do bring PI. Now, it's more of a PI based on their CDs versus others, but typically it aligns pretty well. If their damage profile is relevant and warranted and all that, I could see a Shadow Priest as raid tier. Shadow's been in a weird spot where, like, some think they're really high in M+, and some think they're like sort of mid in M+, some think they're like A tier. I think Shadow's sort of like A tier-esque in M+ as well, but a lot of it depends on their tuning, on the outside looking in. There's probably a spot for Shadow in his raid comp. I think they're one of the, like, more on the fence kind of specs. I'm gonna leave them over here in, like, the possible kind of group. I deleted the other specs we talked about already, but quite possibly. I gotta keep in mind we have all this melee still, with some raid buff we need still at this point, and only 5 slots left. Welcome to raid buffs, very fun. Now, moving on to the rest of DPS here, mostly being all melee. Melee is not my total area of expertise or forte. However, both Unholy and Frost are, from what I've heard, in like upper, like mid-esque positions here. Obviously, Frost has like that really strong Breath of Syndragosa profile. If you need it on certain fights, we saw it on Brute Twister Overnax last year. What I've heard about Frost DK, though, I almost fell out of my chair. What I heard about Frost DK, though, is that their damage is not incredibly consistent. When they have Breath going, you even saw it, on Brood Twister last year, like we talked about, when they had Augmentation Evoker in, we talked about earlier, amplifying that Breath of Syndragosa profile even more to kill the ads on Twister, pump them down those harder to beat, egg sets. Yeah, it's exceptionally strong. But at the same time, outside of that, they're not as consistent. I mean, they do have Death Grip and things. You're gonna possibly have certain fights maybe where you went Gorfine's Grasp as well, which Blood Decay could slot in, or Brewmaster or Prot. But I think for the most part, they're probably both on the outside looking in. There could be a spot for like a DK this tier. AMZ also, it's a thing, but like, I mean, you don't need AMZ, like you need, you know, Mark or Chaos Brand or Mystic Touch, right? So I'm gonna leave them over here in consideration. We're not saying they're not in the comp, but they're not, you know, like OP level of like, you know, Shaman, Mage, Utility, whatever, this and that in the raid tier, right? So we'll leave them off to the side and possibly consider bringing them in depending on where things go, well, in a little bit. Now, Fury and Arms. Obviously, you're going to want a Warrior for Shout this raid tier, right? These are one of the specs, I guess, classes that could indeed be stacked due to how high they are simming currently. Now, is they going to last? I don't know. You're definitely going to play one here. I think Fury is the higher simming one currently. I'm pretty sure. Not 100% on that. I can dig a little bit here. I see someone responding to me in Discord about it at this exact moment. I'm pretty sure Fury is the higher simming one, but it might, I know they're both pretty high at this point, and their profiles do vary a little bit. I believe one of them's target capped at 5. Warrior is like this spec I'm not incredibly clear on, but I am clear that you want an attack power buff. You want Shout this tier. Besides that, utility is sort of whatever, it's fine, like niche stuff. They're both pretty close. It's going to come down to last minute tuning, but that for now, Arms is what I'm being told. So there you go. I believe, you know, sure, you're playing at least one this tier, and once again, with how high they're simming, I'm going to put another Arms over here because this could be one of the classes you stack this raid tier. Even looking back, I think, I'm trying to think back to last year you stacked multiple Warriors. I'm pretty sure it was actually Amir Jasil, right? Went there too, I think, on most bosses, give or take. For the 10th time, this raid tier is a very spread cleave based profile kind of raid tier, but when there are certain classes, I mean, like, you still need that patchwork damage, right? If you can get some stat cleave this tier, very strong. And even putting all that aside, like, you need to kill the boss still. And if you're the best at doing the most damage in single target, quite often those profiles are looked at, even putting aside, you know, relevancy. Like, yeah, you don't need 2 shouts, but if you're pumping, if you're piping, there's a good chance you're going to be stacked, right? Retribution Paladins, interesting. Their tuning seems fine. They have a lot of, like, on-demand burst damage in short CDs. Not insane funnel damage, not insane single target and all that. But, like, they're fine. They're solid. Is it going to be part of, like, a world first comp and things? I doubt it. They do bring blessings, obviously. Bop, sack, freedom, all that kind of stuff. Very nice and relevant as well. But the fact that you're playing prot here, I mean, not a whole lot of, like, they don't have a raid buff, in a sense, but blessings are strong, all that kind of stuff. Auras are also nice as well, but it feels like their profile is fine, but not one I'm looking for necessarily going into, like, building an optimal raid comp for, like, a world first kind of setting or higher end at this point. And then as far as rogue, you're going to want one for a trophic poison, whatever it is, the curse of weakness esque, you know, what is it called? Trophic poison, 3% reduced damage dealt from the boss. It competes with numbing poison. Rogue's been all over the place this PTR. In testing, they were pretty subpar way back. I believe their tier is still bugged. Whatever spec's interchangeable, whatever's good for the fight, you'll end up playing. You're going to want one rogue. I'm going to throw this in here. Outlaw, because that's cool. It's a big sword. Don't know. Whatever's good, you'll play one. It's sort of how Lock feels this tier. There might be some fights like where maybe you play 2 Lock, but you're going to want one. You want one for the raid buff, Trophic Poison, and, you know, the raid buff in a sense. So to sort of round out this, like, raid comp list slash tier list and everything here, I've added a couple, well, a handful of classes down here, a lot of specs, whatever, that could be slotted into these last 2 or 3 slots, so are sort of interchangeable. Obviously, Demonology and Affliction, we talked about it. Hellcaller is good this raid tier. If a fight wants Affliction's profile, like Cauldron of Carnage, for more spread dot cleave, it's possible it's good there. If you can get some stat cleave with, like, prio damage on a boss, Demonology can be very good there. But for the most part, this looks to mostly be, I would say, a Destruction raid, a Hellcaller raid for Warlock. As far as Windwalker is concerned, a bit of it plays into if you have Mystic Touch from a Brewmaster and or a Mistweaver, which you likely have in one of these 2 somewhere. Their profile is not bad. I've heard their single target's pretty strong. Their stat cleave is decent as well. Spinning Crane Kick is capped at 5, I'm pretty sure. But still, a lot of, like, when you get stat cleave, this raid tier does seem to be like a mid-ish number of, like, mobs, like 4, 5, 6, like the dogs running around on 6 Spunk Junker. Vexy has 3 to 4 mobs as well, stacked in the boss. It might not actually be that bad in one of these sleeper spots you can put in here. Obviously, Trill buff, utterly insane. Elite 1, that should probably be at the top of this list, is like one of the definite like candidates for this 19th and 20th spot here. Both Ellie and Enhance are strong. If for some reason you want Ellie's profile, maybe a little better at like spread cleave, maybe like you want Stormkeeper value and things, they both bring Sky Fury, both are strong here. I could even see a raid where you play both one Enhance and one Ellie. They're both are very strong, and hey, Shaman's getting their time in light again, it looks like, in 11-1, which is cool to see. When it comes to like Rep Paladin and Devastation Evoker, I mean, it just sort of seems like Red's cooldowns, they can do a lot of damage in a relatively short window, but I've often found people saying like they can do it, but is it really relevant damage? And they can pump. I heard the single target's like mid-ish, give or take, but it feels like when you have, they don't really bring that raid buff spot a whole lot. If you're playing a prop paladin, obviously a lot of like blessings, auras, and like, you know, nice ways to like cheese mechanics, or they can't basically die. But is their profile that relevant with what the raid wants? A lot of spread cleave, and do they bring a raid buff? And in the end, not really. Not a bad spec to play overall, but like sort of To a similar extent, Devastation, if you're playing Augmentation, do you really need a dev with their stat cleave profile? Albeit they are pretty mobile, have infinite utility, being an evoker themselves. I wouldn't be surprised if you see one thrown in, but I mean, it's just sort of like, I think at this current point in time, you're looking at like Alien Shadow probably being the two bigger dogs to slot in here. I don't know why Aug's over here. Probably into like one of these last two slots here. Marks and Survival, just not as good as BM. Feral's fine too. I think like Balance's profile is just better this raid tier. They both end up bringing Mark the Wild, both bring Innervate here. So it's like, what do you really do? Feral getting single target, good stat cleave, but you know what's better in single target, from what I've heard? Warrior. And at the same time, they bring Shout, whatever it's called. And just in general, their profile seems a bit stronger. So we'll see where that goes. Arcane Mage, similar to Fire and Frost, is not as good, or, you know, same utility, just not really as good overall from what I've heard. I mean, if Fury's better than Arms, swap it into sure. Whatever Rogue spec sees play, great. I have no idea. They've all been in a crazy spot over the course of PTR, but they do bring that 3% damage reduction, you know, poison, so that's important to have around too. But I feel like, honestly, if you're asking these last two spots here, man, I go like this probably, like Elemental and Shadow. I mean, you could, it's really gonna flex a lot too. If you're like 3 healing a fight and you bring like a third Arm or a third Warrior, second Enhanced Shaman, I could see 2 Enhanced Shaman being a thing here too. At the same time, Havoc Demon Hunter is very strong. You could slot in a second Havoc Demon Hunter. Just play something like this, right? Destro on some fights too, very strong spread cleave profile. Maybe you go like, you know, 2 Havoc, 1 Destro, 1 Shadow for those fights. Augmentation amplifying those profiles further in those encounters here. A lot of flexibility, a decent bit of flexibility in the last two spots. If you don't have a Monk, you know, for whatever reason, bring Windwalker. Important to keep raid, buff, comp, and all that in mind. But for the most part, I'd say this is probably, you can probably even put the Shadow Priest in here. It's probably fine. This is roughly, give or take, probably where I'd look, maybe to start. Maybe second Enhance over second Havoc here, depending where they land. Haven't really seen much since the actual changes came out, but either way, I think this is like relatively accurate. I live in Florida. It's my best guess. Don't hate me if I'm wrong. Yeah. So thanks for watching, guys. It wraps it up, and hopefully I didn't offend too many people with their class or spec not being mentioned in this video. Yeah, hopefully gave y'all a better understanding or look at, I guess, a general raid comp heading into World First stuff and all that. It's very important to drive home here that I'm just a Florida man. This could all be wrong. It's probably relatively accurate, but tuning is probably coming, whether it's today when this video comes out, Monday, Tuesday, who knows at this point. But at this point in time, and with raid buffs and things being taken into account, I think that's relatively accurate as what you're going to see on most fights. But it's important to keep in mind that damage profiles do vary. This very well may change. Class is going to be buffed and nerfed, and it could look a little different. If things do change, I'll maybe make another video about it when the patch comes out, and, you know, we'll go from there. But I enjoy making these videos. I'm trying to expand from just Warlock-based content to more general WoW content, but also keeping, like, the Warlock content the same. You know, and hopefully y'all enjoyed it. If you guys want any weak wars or profiles, anything that I use, website, Discord, Twitch links all up here, as well as down below. And like always, every video, a massive thank you to all my patrons and supporters on Patreon for all that support. Thank you all so much, guys. I greatly appreciate it. And if you're looking at supporting on Patreon, it should be a link up here, as well as, you know, down below in the description. To clarify, it is currently February 20th at 6 p.m. when I'm recording this video. If things change, like I said, I'll probably try to make another video for both the M+ tier list and or the rating one. And thank you to everybody who helped me with this video. Jack, Dratnos, Tattles, everybody who gave a little bit of insight, but, you know, they're good people. You should go sub to them as well, because, you know, they're champions. So, well, that being said, thanks for watching, guys. If you like the video, hit the like and sub button below. It helps out a ton. And I'll catch you all again soon on stream. Peace.